This week on the video version of the Business of Tech, big movement from the US government on ransomware, $31 a month for Windows 365 and why you care, consumers in the current market, the world of work, politics, location, and employee motivation, Zoom's big strategy reveal, California and Virginia go big on broadband, security roundups, plus legislation and market data you care about. Hit that like and subscribe button, and here's this week's stories. Kicking off the week with some outlooks and some market conditions. Spending is soaring, but loan balances aren't, the big banks said last week. Wells Fargo loan balances are down 10% compared to a year ago and 6% from the first 3 months of 2021. At JP Morgan, they're down 3%, but lending is picking up among its wealthiest clients, Bloomberg reports. And fueling the cash situation, the first monthly payments of cash for parents and caretakers went out last week. Paid through December, these are designed to further fuel the spending boom and help families. The child tax credit is forecast to contribute to the single biggest drop in child poverty in history. The tax credit is expected to add over 1% to monthly disposable income. And Goldman Sachs expects the payouts to last beyond 2021. In that climate, a new survey from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and MetLife. Small business owners who can't find employees are doing it themselves, as well as asking staff to take on more hours. How are they planning to get more workers? Over a quarter say they will switch up advertising, while others will boost pay at 24%, offer flexible hours 22%, or offer a hybrid work environment, 21%. Also released, Markets and Markets research on managed services. Focused on the enterprise, here are the highlights. 60% of enterprises reported that the IT challenges are becoming more acute and it's getting harder to manage. Nearly 70% of enterprises are reaching out to MSPs to fill cloud IT skill gaps, and enterprises that embrace MSPs have experienced a 42% savings in IT budget. Now, why do we care? Consumers are not borrowing and are flush with cash. I look at consumer data in the context of IT services because so much of the work is done in small business, which is closely tied to the consumer. If you're thinking about your customer's customer, often in SMB, that's the consumer directly. This should be a very rich environment for IT opportunities. Customers with cash being squeezed to do more with less, particularly as it comes to workers. Layer in the possibility of more possible lockdowns in the fall and winter. Now is certainly a good time to be delivering solutions in the workplace layer. The U.S. government launched a new website to help public and private organizations defend against the rise in ransomware cases. StopRansomware.gov is a whole-of-government approach that gives one central location for ransomware resources and alerts. CISA has also released their mitigations and hardening guidance for MSPs and small and mid-sized businesses. My notes on it? The guide includes dedicated VPN connections to MSP infrastructure, among other stronger guidance. How about creating a baseline for systems and network behavior? That's in there too. CISA, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the National Security Agency jointly announced an increase of sophisticated Chinese state-sponsored activity targeting U.S. political, economic, military, educational, and critical infrastructure personnel and organizations. In the advisory, they highlight a number of actions taken. The White House released a statement attributing recent Microsoft Exchange server exploitation activity to the People's Republic of China. The Department of Justice indicted 4 Chinese cyber actors from the Advanced Persistent Threat Group APT-40 for malicious cyber activities carried out on orders from the Chinese government. The accusation? Theft of trade secrets, intellectual property, and other high-value information from both government and commercial entities. Also released, the Joint Cybersecurity Advisory, TTPS, of indicated APT-40 actors associated with China's MSS Henan State Security Department to help network defenders identify and remediate APT-40 intrusions and establish footholds. And the Joint Cybersecurity Advisory on Chinese Observed TTPS, which describes Chinese cyber threat behavior and trends and provides mitigation and CISA insights. The Chinese Cyber Threat Overview for Leaders to help leaders understand this threat and how to reduce their organization's risk of falling victim to cyber espionage and data theft. And the State Department will be offering rewards to those who help identify individuals engaged in foreign state-sponsored malicious cyber activity, up to $10 million reward. Treasury will be working with banks to focus on improving anti-money laundering around crypto and the tracing of ransomware proceeds. And unrelated, that Microsoft hack on ServeU products, that's also been linked to a Chinese hacker group. And while ransomware is the top story, Axios covers how becoming a disinformation campaign target is another growing risk. And this one is cheaper to launch and harder to protect against. Think that's not coming? Google's threat analysis group has revealed that Russian hackers used LinkedIn messages to target government officials, leveraging an iOS 0-day vulnerability. Why do we care? I'm certainly encouraged by the long list of movements coming from the US government. None of them will be felt immediately, however, so short term, it's likely to get worse before it gets better. At best, it's a constant. Today's reason we care is this massive list of resources, just a bit of light reading for your work week. I'm focusing on one, that specific guide for MSPs and small businesses. There's a lot in there I suspect most providers are not actually doing. Here's the key question for me. In a world of risk management, what's the risk of not aligning with the published guidance from the experts? Not the risk of breach, but the risk of lawsuit. Worth digging into that more on that guidance. We don't have pricing yet for Windows 365, except for a small leak. One option for 2 CPUs, 4 GB of RAM, and 128 GB of storage is $31 a month. Microsoft has indicated this is just one pricing option and not the lowest. Now, why do we care? August 2nd is the release date, so final pricing is coming. But just this price point alone tells providers what we need to know. This is in the realm of affordable. For me, it's enough knowledge to be building potential offerings to consider. And that's enough. Lots to talk about today as it relates to work and workers. Let's start with data published by CIO Dive. Quote, the vast majority of a group of 510 employers with a flexible work program in place, 70% plan to adopt a hybrid work model, while 20% will return to a predominantly office-based model, according to a May survey by HR consulting firm Mercer. Fewer respondents said they would adopt a virtual-first, fully remote or distributed model, according to Mercer, while 97% said they were planning to implement post-pandemic changes to flexible working. Fewer than half were actively deploying their strategies. Full-time, on-site employees will account for 40% of the average workforce among 430 of the employers surveyed, while an average of 29% will consist of those working remotely 1 to 2 days per week. Mercer researchers also suggested that employers look for ways to embrace flexibility beyond remote work, such as adopting flexible schedules or compressed work weeks. End quote. Here's another slice of data. In a survey by Vox and Data for Progress, turns out political leaning is an angle on it. Most Americans approve of working from home, and turns out Democrats more so. To be clear, both are overwhelmingly supportive, Democrats at 89% and Republicans at 81%. On each question, Republicans are just somewhat less likely to approve. Less likely to say remote workers labored as hard, or that they were equally or more productive than non-remote workers. Which leads to the question, does location matter? KPMG asked, and when asked if Silicon Valley will retain its position, A third said yes, and a third said no. 22% said they believe hubs are no longer important, and twice that, 39%, think employees will continue to gather in large, tech-friendly cities. But the next theme? Happiness. The Brand Guild surveyed about 1,000 Americans about their attitudes toward work-life balance and found that just about a quarter ranked work as the most important aspect of their life, down from nearly a third before the pandemic. Work, in fact, came last, with 43% of those surveyed prioritizing living and 31% prioritizing play. Living encompasses a renewed focus on family, friends, and home, with extra emphasis put on houses and apartments that have space, outdoor areas, and amenities. It's easy to figure out why: the pandemic. Haystack asked software engineers about their stress, and in a June 2021 survey, 55% of 278 software engineers in the United Kingdom feel at least moderately burned out at work. The top reasons for feeling this way are too much work and personal stress, but dig deeper, and they are really about work and personal expectations. Females are 16 percentage points more likely than males to be burned out from work, but men are 16 percentage points more likely to cite a high workload as the reason for feeling this way, whereas females point to unrealistic demands on the part of management. Non-binary individuals were not accounted into this survey. And as we consider all that, Google employees aren't happy. There's a stirring anger over policies on remote work, particularly as a senior executive indicated he's moving to New Zealand in an apparent set of special treatment. Apple employees aren't happy either. An internal letter reported on by Recode has employees asking for work from home full-time with some restrictions. This is the second petition letter in 2 months. And Apple itself has pushed back its return to the office deadline to October, responding to the resurgence of COVID variants. That per Bloomberg. Now, why do we care? The search for the answer is what interests me most, because my belief is there isn't a single one. Americans saying work is not the top priority dropping by a third is a headline. I maintain that we're marching towards the inevitable face-off between employee and employers in many, many cases. It seems there's this managed idea that everything will just fall back to what they want it to be, when the data is screaming that employees are going to make decisions that are larger than just what their employer wants. When an individual is reprioritizing their entire life and deciding what is most important and what isn't, and it isn't work, then they will make choices outside the scope of an employer. The opportunity here remains for those companies with leaders who chart their own path and find their values, what works for them. The political data tells me that one size does not fit all. Who your employees are and what makes up that demographic will guide you. Location, political leanings, culture, type of position, age of employee and experience needed, and the like all guide here. And those who help match those needs with the technology that best enables them, combining the business and the technology with culture decisions, will have a fantastic market. There's lots of news in the broadband space to catch up on. Quoting Ars Technica, the California legislature unanimously approved a plan to build a statewide open-access fiber network. The legislation was supported by Democrats and Republicans in votes of 78-0 in the California Assembly and 39-0 in the state Senate. The statewide open-access fiber lines will function as a middle-mile network that carries data from the internet backbone networks to connection points in cities and rural areas. A middle-mile network doesn't extend all the way to residential properties, but last-mile ISPs can get access to it and focus on building infrastructure that connects the middle mile to homes. And in Virginia, the governor announced that the state plans to invest $700 million in the American Rescue Plan funding to reach universal connectivity by 2024. And Senator Mark Warner was quoted saying this would be more than the 25 down, 3 up standard issued by the FCC. And Consumer Reports is launching a project with The Verge to collect and analyze pricing trends. They're collecting customers' bills and want to capture the price and speed of service across the US and make a case for government intervention for consumers who are really stuck. All the while, we have some data on 5G now. OpenSignal released their 5G user experience. How fast is 5G? T-Mobile leads with an average download of 87.5 Mbps, beating AT&T and Verizon's 42.3. T-Mo is also leading on availability and reach, and only somewhat leading on upload speeds. Now, why do we care? Those speeds are so not what I was promised. I wanted my flying car. If the information superhighway metaphor taught us anything, it's that access to the roads will drive transport, and the pandemic sure reinforced that. Will there be a have and have not gap for states? There already is, and it's likely to get worse. My take? The carriers are failing consumers and they're failing small businesses. The more this gets addressed, the larger the market for providers to deliver solutions and drive cloud solutions further. Want to help? Get those bills into the project and get your representative to support broadband, or be left behind. The U.S. recession, touched off by the coronavirus, lasted only 2 months, ending with a low point reached in April 2020 after the start of a sharp drop in economic activity in March of that year, the U.S. Business Cycle Dating Committee announced Monday. That news from Reuters. And a follow-up to yesterday around location. Telstra Ventures analyzed 371,000 jobs posted between April 1 and June 30th, 2021. About 13.2% of New York City-based businesses offer permanently remote positions to new hires, and that's below the national average of 14.2%. Other major cities? About 12.6% of new job postings are remote-friendly in LA, in Washington, D.C., 12%, Atlanta, 9.1%, and Seattle, 8.1%. Houston is the least remote-friendly city, with only 2.8% of jobs posted being remote. Venture-backed companies nationally tend to be more open to remote jobs and have quickly ramped up their embrace of remote work, per the analysis. At the end of June in 2019, 1.6% of job postings by VC-backed firms were remote options, compared with 0.5% of non-VC-backed posts. At the same time in 2021, 15.4% of job postings by VC-backed firms were remote versus 9.1% for non-VC-backed firms' postings. The overall rate is 13.7%. Legal, sales, and engineering jobs tend to be the top job types for remote positions at VC-backed firms. Why do we care? That's how fast the recession moved. 2 months. The open question is how slow the recovery will be and what it will look like. I keep reporting on the fact that the market isn't staying the same nor looking like it used to. That's the takeaway. We're assuming more uncertainty going forward. Apple's news yesterday of delaying reopening due to COVID is one more data point on a blinking sign of continued uncertainty for operators, and it's a sign of things to come. It's not a good or bad thing, just a statement, so plan accordingly. Want to ask, why do we care? T-shirts, stickers, water bottles, and even aprons. Pick up some of our great stuff at the link in the description below and support the show directly. Over the weekend, Zoom bought Five9 in a deal valued at $14.7 billion. The deal brings Five9's call center service capabilities to Zoom's portfolio. The company also announced the general availability of Zoom apps, which are in-meeting integrations to enhance the experience. Now, why do we care? Normally, I don't care much about M&A, as longtime listeners know. This one I do care about because of the strategy implications. I put a big priority on what I term the work layer, the layer where businesses create knowledge, collaborate, and store their data. Office 365, Salesforce, Google Workplace, Slack, and Zoom all have different plays here. 5.9 was highlighted by TechAisle just last month. I've included a link. I was watching to see what Zoom did, particularly with their pandemic war chest. They bought, so they didn't have to build, contact call center capabilities. They're looking to make a unified communications play. And that's why we care. For those IT services providers deciding which flavor of work they want to focus on, now you know where Zoom's direction is. If you missed it earlier this week, the Pegasus spyware story. This is the software sold by surveillance company NSO Group and infected iPhone 11 and 12 models through iMessage. It's been revealed several governments use this software to hack into journalists, activists, politicians, and business executives. There's a tool available that can be used to analyze Android devices and iPhone backups to know if the device was compromised. Keeper's Securities report on ransomware finds that 93% of respondents noted budgets tighten in non-security departments after a ransomware payment, showing the whole organization absorbs the cost. 49% of respondents said their company paid the ransom, and 22% decided not to disclose that information. Ransomware is also causing more data leaks. Per Digital Shadows, there is a 47% increase in Q2 compared to Q1 of the number of victims having data posted on data leak sites. Double extortion tactics are on the rise too, and 60% of victim organizations are in the US. Canalys' research focuses on the traits that make cybersecurity companies stand out. Using online skills assessment tool Cybersecurity 360, these traits were found to include running a dedicated cybersecurity practice, having a focus on managed services, as well as demonstrating the ability to sell to senior leadership within client organizations. The Australian government has formed a task force as well on ransomware, designed to be a cross-agency task force to target those attacks and coordinate to disrupt criminal gangs. This move is similar to the move the US government made recently. The French government has warned about attacks from Chinese-backed APT-31 against French organizations. This comes in the context of warnings earlier this week about Chinese-backed hacking groups being responsible for the Microsoft Exchange hacking campaign. And traditional defenses are failing. Cloudian's 2021 ransomware victims report says half of organizations, 49%, reported having perimeter defenses in place prior to a successful ransomware attack. Despite 54% of organizations conducting anti-phishing training, 1/4, 24%, of ransomware attacks used phishing as the point of entry. Accenture adds more color. The dark web economy is driving a feeding ground for new threat actors. Information is easier than ever to acquire and is driving the boldness of these ransomware actors. In the context of the Biden administration's executive order, Google Cloud has released new security products to bring managed security services. Cloud IDS is a cloud-managed intrusion detection system, new capabilities in Chronicle, its security analytics platform, expanded risk protection program to all Google Cloud customers, and a new zero trust assessment and planning offering. There are even more, link in the show notes. For developers, MITRE has updated their top 25 bugs list. These are the easy to discover and highest impact types of problems in software. Now, why do we care? Well, I don't believe IT service providers generally can do much about nation states. That doesn't mean issues like NSO Group's actions can be ignored. Story time. Ransomware costs businesses by pulling from all parts of the business. It now comes with a likelihood of the data being given away online, and so far traditional defenses don't work that well. The dark web breeds new enemies, and multiple governments are weighing in. If traditional methodology doesn't work, it's time for new thinking. For the typical SMB or mid-market company, this should be a pretty core re-examination of how technology is leveraged. That's the opportunity for sure, just don't assume it's easy. And for me, also not assuming that best practices alone are the way of the future. Yesterday's techniques are not the solution. Trust nothing, which is a different philosophy than generally employed previously. While there's a lot of security today, this security story I wanted to keep distinct. Quoting Computer Weekly. Around a third of cybersecurity professionals say they have had personal experience of in-person and online abuse and harassment during the course of their work, according to research data commissioned by Respect in Security, a newly established scheme that is urging organizations to pledge their support in making workplaces and the security community free from harassment and fear. Out of those that reported experiencing in-person harassment, most said it came at industry events, 36%, in the office, 47%, or work socials, 48%, while online harassment was most likely to have occurred on Twitter, 44%, or via email, 37%. Why do we care? With the massive list of needs around security, to then have a third of professionals facing abuse is appalling. Respect in Security has a pledge on its website with details for an organization's commitment towards building an environment free from harassment and fear. I talk a lot about culture of companies on this show. This is a resource and a huge problem to highlight. Global IT spending is projected to total $4.2 trillion in 2021, a jump of 8.6% from last year, according to the latest forecast by Gartner. Its data forecasts the IT services segment to total $1.2 trillion in 2021, a rise of 9.8% from 2020. A flash survey of 100 US and European CIOs conducted by Morgan Stanley suggests overall technology budgets are about to decline by 4.4% this year. Previously, the same survey had been forecasting a 3.5% growth. And, quoting Smarter MSP, managed services generated nearly $8 billion in annual contract value in the second quarter of 2021, the biggest quarter in the history of an index created by Information Services Group that tracks deals in value of excess of $5 million. That's not only a 24% increase over the same quarter a year ago, the report also finds that level of growth represents a 13% improvement on the historic average. 3/4 of government IT decision makers cite migrating and managing data from legacy systems to the cloud as a challenge, but 60% think it's important to modernize IT infrastructure to improve efficiency and security, according to an IBM survey released last Friday. Half of respondents cited performance issues as a barrier to cloud migration, 38% said training users on new systems slowed modernization, and 26% blamed bandwidth costs as a concern. Datto released their global state of the MSP market. 96% of MSPs expect their revenues to increase over the next 3 years. 93% believe it's a good time to be an MSP versus 86% pre-pandemic. 99% deliver some kind of managed security services, and competition is what keeps them up at night. Oh, and jobs. Per job site Indeed, the number of postings using words like hiring urgently has spiked over 50%. Why do we care? Gartner says spending is up, and CIOs say budgets are getting smaller. Within that, managed services are growing. Of course, that's at the enterprise level. Datto's data says there's optimism. And that IBM survey tells us the opportunity and the challenge. Sure, it may be a great time to be a provider if you're pushing on a modern infrastructure and dealing with customers who are investing in technology. I'll frame this in risk management. Services are needed to solve problems and help customers, and there's tons of opportunities. Just ensure, based on all the risk I discuss in security sections, that you've appropriately managed your risk. Because it's not easy, including challenges like staffing. TechAisle has some research this week supporting the idea that Microsoft's cloud PC will be widely adopted. Quoting the piece, TechAisle data suggests that SMB and mid-market buyers will appreciate its portability, native access to web-based resources, its innovative approach to security, access to Microsoft Office personal productivity solutions, namely Microsoft 365, and the ability to add Azure Active Directory. Data from a survey conducted by TechAisle in the US shows that 5% of very small businesses, 10% of small businesses, 16% of core mid-market firms, and 32% of upper mid-market organizations may adopt Cloud PC. Now, why do we care? I'm bullish on Cloud PC, particularly as a solution to that risk management problem. And seems the market is too. That initial dataset might be considered small, but I'd offer it's a great slice. It's also early days and without investment. If it was me delivering services, I'd be all in with Cloud PCs. And a legislation review. The new Bipartisan Cyber Incident Notification Act has been introduced that would compel some companies to report being breached. Per CNBC, quote, the proposed bill would introduce a new disclosure requirement for federal agencies, federal contractors, and critical infrastructure companies to notify the Department of Homeland Security when they identify a breach of their systems. It also gives those companies limited immunity when they report a breach. For instance, shareholders could not gain access to the disclosed information to use as evidence in a lawsuit. It also would require DHS to anonymize personally identifiable information. End quote. The Federal Trade Commission has also formally pledged to take on unlawful right to repair restrictions in a policy statement released Wednesday. And over at the Department of Justice, the administration has picked Jonathan Cantor, a leading antitrust voice, particularly around Google, as the lead on antitrust efforts. In Israel, in reaction to the software sold by NSO Group used to spy on journalists and officials, and reported yesterday, they're considering changes to the export policy used to allow the software to be developed and sold. Now, why do we care? Trend-wise, it's the march to regulation. Sure, that disclosure law starts with big companies. It's just a matter of time before it trickles down or gets replicated via insurance requirements. The mood of legislatures is to take action. There's been a chorus of "not in my backyard" from a section of providers this week, but their assumption appears to be that they can ignore this trend and it will magically go away. I disagree. I'll be reporting back over time to see how this actually plays out. Thanks for tuning in to This Week in the Business of Tech. Shows come out each week, pulling together the daily podcast. If you like this show, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. The content here is possible because of supporters like you. If you want access to shows early, answers to your questions, and private interactions, join our Patreon. It's pay what you want. You decide what the content is worth. Join at patreon.com/MSPradio. Patreons also get access to the written versions of every story as they come out. If you want the stories right away, you can get them on the daily podcast. Find The Business of Tech on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your shows. Subscribe links at businessof.tech, and I'll talk to you again next week.